morning, everyone. My name is Alpana Sharma, and I am a business advisor at Women's Enterprise Center, working out of our Vancouver office. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the agenda. I will provide an update on the services we provide, introduce our panelists, and then get started into the discussion on free trade agreements. So Women's Enterprise Center is a non-profit organization devoted to helping BC women start, lead, and grow their own business. With offices in Kelowna, Vancouver, and Victoria, our team understands and relates to the unique circumstances of women business owners. Our full range of services includes business loans up to $150,000, business advice, skills training, mentoring, resources, and a very supportive community to help women entrepreneurs realize their business potential. So our experienced business advisors, trainers, and facilitators provide our clients with tools and confidence through a supportive, individual, and practical approach. So to stay informed of what's happening in your area and learn more about our services, please visit our website, womensenterprise.ca. Remember to sign up for our newsletter. It's a great way to stay updated of what's happening in your community and what are the important events and workshops coming up. So to answer your questions this morning, we have an amazing panelist, Chelsea Luciani. She is a senior manager in the Trade Policy and Negotiations branch in the BC Ministry of Jobs, Trade and Technology. She has covered several international free trade agreements and negotiations, such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, better known as CPTPP, the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, also known as CETA, and the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. So this is going to be a very important webinar, tons of useful information. If you are an exporter or if you are thinking about exporting, to learn more about trade agreements is going to be very, very helpful in your business growth, in growing internationally. We will have time for questions towards the end also. We have received a few questions from clients when they registered for this webinar, so we will have some time for questions. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Chelsea, to explain what is a free trade agreement and how can exporters benefit from it, because this is a great resource for exporters or potential exporters to know about. So I'm just going to hand it over to you, Chelsea.
Thank you, Alpana. Let me just share my screen.
Yeah.
Can everyone see the cover page of the presentation, PowerPoint presentation?
Yep, it's very clear.
All right, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alpana, for that very kind introduction. So as she said, my name is Chelsea Luciani. I come from the Trade Policy and Negotiations branch in the Ministry of Jobs, Trade and Technology here in the BC government. And one of the functions of the office I work for is free trade agreements. So we work on the negotiations with the federal government. We do a lot of work to understand what BC's interests are and what industry and companies care about, and try and get the best deal possible for BC companies and BC communities. So I'm very happy to be here this morning, and thank you very much for having me. So what I'd like to cover today, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of static. Alpana, do you hear that static noise?
No, I hear you very clearly, Chelsea.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
There's just a bit of static on my end. Sorry, everybody.
Okay.
So a little bit of what I'd like to cover today is the ministry that I'm from, what free trade agreements are and what they do, a little bit about modern free trade agreements, where Canada's free trade agreements are in the world, and then I group the main opportunities for free trade agreements for goods sectors, for the services sectors, investment, for government procurement. Towards the end of the presentation, I'd like to walk you through how you look up a tariff rate and what the tariff rate may be for some of your products. And I'd also like to go over some free resources that are available to BC companies to better understand trade agreements and better understand how to execute. And as she said, we'd have some time for questions at the end. So a little bit about the ministry that I'm from. The goal of the ministry is to build a strong, sustainable economy that works for everybody. The ministry aims to assist BC businesses to be aware of and take advantage of trade opportunities in existing. We try to focus on underrepresented support groups and SMEs throughout the BC. And especially in today's world, we really are working on encouraging trade diversification, working to fight protectionism abroad, and to enhance market access to BC's exports. Finally, we work to support communities to attract investment to create resilience. So a little bit on what a free trade agreement is. So before free trade agreements, there is actually something called World Trade Organization access. So there are several WTO agreements, and this is sort of the basis for the international trading. So these are rules that 164 countries have agreed on to govern the trade between them. Now, if a couple of countries want to have better than this WTO access, then they can negotiate a trade agreement between them. So, for example, the US, Mexico, and Canada negotiated the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, so that they would have better access among the three countries than they had before under the World Trade Organization. So an FTA essentially is to facilitate trade between two or more countries. The goal of these trade agreements is to reduce tariff rates, so tariffs are duties, and non-tariff barriers. A non-tariff barrier is things like requiring duplicate certification. Now, trade agreements, they typically cover goods, they cover services, investments, government and intellectual property, and they also provide a recourse for disputes. So if the countries agree on a trade agreement and agree on goals, and if they're not living up to their commitments, the agreement has a way of dealing with that. Now, modern free trade agreements increasingly have chapters on the environment and on labor. So what this means is like they agree on things like that each country will enforce their environmental and labor laws and they will not derogate from them. Now, the reason this is important, like not just because it's the right thing to do, but also if another country is lowering their environmental and labor laws in order to attract trade, then you are at a competitive disadvantage because the cost of doing business is cheaper in that country. So by including these chapters, we are ensuring high standards around the world, that, there's protections for environment and for labor also, so that the playing field is level. Another thing that modern FTAs do is focus on inclusive trade. So this is in recognition that we want to make sure free trade agreements benefit as wide a group as possible across like a community. So not just, traditionally the businesses, but ensuring that, SMEs benefit, ensuring that businesses owned by women, by Indigenous peoples, that they are also seeing the benefit of free trade. So this has been a focus of the federal government for the last few years, and you'll start to see these in like Canada's modern FTAs, that there are chapters and provisions for these.
Elsie, can I interrupt with your voice is breaking a bit?
Oh, I'll get a bit closer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Is this better?
Yeah, much better. Yeah, so thank you.
Apologies, everyone. All right, let me continue. All right. So I've got a map here to show you where Canada's free trade agreements are right now in the world. And you'll notice that it's color-coded. So the countries in blue, this is where Canada has already implemented a free trade agreement with. So you'll see the US and Mexico under NAFTA. You'll see the EU is in blue as a result of the EU trade agreement. And so just a comment on the NAFTA. The NAFTA is still in effect. So the three countries did renegotiate the NAFTA over the last year or so, but that agreement is not yet in effect. So for now, the NAFTA is what you use. Now, the countries in purple, these are countries where Canada has concluded a free trade agreement negotiation, but those countries have not yet ratified the agreement. So you'll see that Malaysia and Brunei are in purple. So those countries, they need to ratify an agreement, and then we'll have access, free trade agreement access to those countries. Now, for the countries in green, these are countries where Canada is either currently negotiating an agreement or they're in exploratory talks to negotiate an agreement. So, for example, you'll see that several countries in South America are in green, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And this is because Canada is in negotiations with Mercosur, which is those 4 countries' economic grouping, to enter into a free trade agreement. So it's actually an opportunity right now. If you are doing business with any of these countries, if you are interested in doing business there, if you know of any barriers, your product faces high tariff, it's really time to let either myself know or the federal government know, because this will be built into the negotiations, and it sort of becomes intel that the government can use to try and get better access for you in the negotiation. An exploratory talk, for example, Canada is an exploratory talk with the ASEAN region, Southeast Asia. Exploratory talks are to see if there are enough complementarities between the jurisdictions to get into negotiation for a free trade agreement. So again, an opportunity for companies to let governments know that yes, you haven't reached ASEAN, or you're having difficulty in one ASEAN market or another, and that you'd like the negotiation to try and address that if it enters into a negotiation. So one thing I'd like to also mention is that in Canada, we also have trade agreements within Canada, and I will spend a few minutes towards later in the presentation. And for the next couple of slides, I'd like to focus on 3 of Canada's most recent free trade agreements, starting with the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement, the CKFTA. This agreement entered into force in 2015. It was Canada's first free trade agreement with Asian countries. Now, this is important because before this agreement, BC companies were actually at a disadvantage because the EU, the US, and Australia had all concluded agreements with South Korea before we did. So this agreement is playing a part in helping us catch up to those countries and to get better access to South Korea. The second agreement I'd like to focus on is the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which we call the CETA for short. So this is with the European Union. As you know, it's a market of approximately 500 million people, so a lot of potential customers there. This agreement is been provisionally in effect as of September 2017. So what provisionally in effect means is that most of the agreement, over 90%, came into effect in 2017. So that includes things like tariff elimination. Now, there is a very small part of the agreement that still needs individual member states of the EU to ratify. And this is a function of how the EU and member states have divided jurisdiction over international trade. But the most important parts of the agreement, especially the parts that would benefit companies, are already in effect as of 2017. So day one, in September 2017, the EU dropped tariffs on 98% of Canada's exports to 0 on day one. So a lot of opportunities there, and it's also a very ambitious agreement. So also of note, Canada is the only G7 country with preferential access to the world's 2 largest economies, the US and the EU. Now, the third agreement I'd like to focus on is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific, the CPTPP. So you may recall that this agreement used to be called the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and you may recall that the United States used to be a member of this as well. When President Trump was elected, one of the first things he did in office was to withdraw the United States from this agreement. So what happened after that is that the 11 remaining members, so you'll see I've listed them there in the second bullet, those 11 members decided to continue the agreement without the US, and they renamed it and made a few changes. So as a result of the fact that now the companies from these countries, now they're no longer competing with American companies in these jurisdictions, so it actually is a competitive advantage. For example, a BC company in Australia or Japan or Vietnam, for example, that company is no longer competing with an American company because we actually have better access to these markets. So it's a window of opportunity with a competitive advantage. I do urge you to take advantage of it. This advantage won't last forever. We know the US is trying to arrange trade agreements with several of these countries. So it's sort of a time-limited opportunity. But anyways, just backing up a little bit, the CPTPP, the entire region of 11 countries, when it's fully in effect, it will be 500 million people. So cover 500 million people and 13% of global GDP, with future members lining up to join. The agreement is currently in effect for 7 out of the 11 members. So Canada, Australia, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, Singapore, as of December 30th, 2018, and in Vietnam as of January 14, 2019. And as I alluded to earlier, we are actually expected to benefit more under this new agreement than the original TPP. So one other point I'd like to make on this agreement is that we are actually now in year 2 of the agreement. Even though the agreement only came into effect less than a year ago, there's a tariff elimination schedule. So tariffs come down in equal stages year over year, but the first 7 countries decided to apply 2 years of that schedule in advance of 2 years. So we are, even though the agreement's only been in effect for less than a year, we actually have already benefited from 2 tariff cuts. So I will show you in a few slides how you can figure that out. Now, over the next couple of slides, I'm going to focus on the opportunities in general for, as I said, the goods sector, the service sectors, investments, and so on. So the first one is, before I do that, I'd like to cover very briefly the domestic trade agreement. So in Canada, we have something called the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, the CFTA. It includes the federal government and all provinces and territories, and it has a process for reconciling regulations that can be unnecessary barriers to trade. So the reason we have these agreements is to make trade flow as easily as possible within the country as well, and to ensure that we're not falling behind our international free trade agreements. So the second bullet, the process of reconciling regulations that can be unnecessary barriers to trade. One example of this is that provinces have different rules on the first aid kits that are required if you are driving a long-haul truck across in your territory, in your jurisdiction. So if a truck is crossing 3 provincial borders, that truck may have to carry 3 separate first aid kits because they all have different standards on what should be in that kit. So one thing this agreement tries to do is to try and take barriers like that, where it's creating unnecessary extra burden on a company, and to reconcile these to make things as easy as possible and reduce as much burden as possible. Like the international trade agreement, it also includes an enforceable dispute settlement mechanism. So if another province or territory is not living up to their obligations, there is a way of ensuring that they do. Now, in addition to the agreement across the country, we also have an agreement with 4 West. This is called the New West Partnership Trade Agreement, the NWPTA. So this agreement is BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Now, this agreement also has enforceable and streamlined dispute settlement and streamlined business registration. Now, what this means is that you can register your business and pay for the fee in one province and tick a box for the other provinces as well that you would like to register in. So really saving you the trouble and the expense of having to register your business in all the different territories that it covers. Okay. So one thing I'd like to do now is to focus a little bit about the opportunities in general for the goods sectors. And I've pulled out the 3 international agreements that I'd like to cover. So for the first one, the CKFTA, that's the Korea Agreement. The CETA is the EU Agreement. And the CPTPP, it's the agreement in the Asia Pacific with 11 countries. So as you can see in the first row, under the Korea Agreement, right now, for 95% of Canadian goods going to South Korea, the tariff is actually 0% right now. Going into the EU, it's already 98%. And for the CPTPP, once that agreement is fully in effect, it will become 99% zero. Now, an important thing to note on these tariffs is that these tariff treatments, they have to be claimed by the importer, typically by the importer, because if you don't claim it, that tariff elimination will not be applied automatically to your good. This is something that you have to claim in order to see that benefit. Now, I've pulled out a couple of sectors to show you what the tariff opportunities are for these sectors. So, for example, for agriculture and agri-food, if you look under the Korea Agreement, for 97% of Canadian goods, it will be 0% when fully implemented. If we go to the next row on fish and seafood, the tariff on in the EU, almost 96% of Canadian fish and seafood, they are now facing 0% tariffs in the EU. So again, very important to make sure you're claiming that preferential tariff. Now for the CPTPP fish and seafood, it will be 100%, will be 0 when it's fully in effect. A couple of other examples for example, digital products. So if you have a digital product that you are transmitting electronically to a seller in another market in one of these trade agreements, there will be no duties when you transmit that product electronically. So if you send a digital product electronically to Korea, to a European Union country, or a country in the CPP, there should be no duties on that. So just to continue on for goods, so we've talked about tariffs. There's also benefits for non-tariff barriers. So these are things like duplicate certification, like requiring multiple testing. So the agreements really try and reduce these non-tariff barriers because these also cost the businesses. The agreements also focus on improved rules of origin. Now, what this is that typically if you are going to claim a tariff preference, your product has to be considered Canadian. So in recognition that in today's world, most things are not built 100% in one country only, using 100% of inputs from one country, and rules of origin, whereby a product that has sufficient Canadian content would be considered a Canadian product and would become eligible for that reduced tariff. Another opportunity is that there is increased transparency and predictability. The agreements write out the rules, everything is spelled out, so you know how your goods should be treated when you send it to another market. Finally, just a small comment on exceptions. So trade agreements try and liberalize as much as they can, but countries always negotiate certain exceptions to them of things that they will keep outside of the trade agreement. So it's very important to check what the rule is for your product and to see whether or not an exception applies. For the most part, it is likely that there won't be an exception for your product because the list of exceptions tends to be fairly small. Now, for the services sectors, a main opportunity is that there is increased transparency and predictability. And similar to the goods sector, this is because it's spelled out how you will be treated, so you know how your company, when you're selling or supplying your service in another market, will be treated. So, for example, there is a rule that the other country will treat your service being supplied, no worse than they treat services supplied in their own market. So it increases and makes sure the playing field is as level as possible. So this is a very important commitment that countries make.
Chelsea, this is Alma. Yes. Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Of course.
I do find that the voice is cutting out. And we are trying to fix that. So I do apologize to our participants for our challenges today with the sound quality. We'll try to fix it. So I just wanted to, because I do see that some of the participants are also pointing it out. So my apologies for that. We will try to fix it during the session, Chelsea. The sound quality, because sometimes the sound is very clear and sometimes it cuts out. We'll try to fix that. But let's go on. Thank you for Chelsea.
Okay. And Alpana, if I'm cutting out, just ask me to repeat what I just said, and I will happily do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Apologies, everyone. Okay, so as I was saying, for the services sectors, the agreements try and level the playing field as much as they can. So a very common commitment in these agreements is that they treat you no worse than they would treat their own service suppliers. So going in, you know how you will be treated. There's enhanced market access. So a very common commitment is that the countries agree that they will not suddenly decide that they will only allow a certain number of service suppliers for one sector at a given time. They agree that they won't suddenly require you to only hire, 30 people or 50 people or restrictions like that. So it's really trying to make things as open and as predictable as possible. A quick note as I said, for goods, sometimes there is a small list of exceptions that you need to check to make sure that you are not one of those. Your sector is not one of those that is not covered. But for the most part, most things are in. So for the three agreements, the Korea agreement, the EU agreement, and the one in the Asia Pacific 11 countries, they use what is called a negative list. So a negative list means that everything is in unless there's a specific exception taken against it. So as I said, it's very likely that most of the services that you're wanting to supply will be covered by these agreements. You just need to check the exceptions. And this is something that we can help you with if you have questions. So don't hesitate to get in touch. Another important thing these agreements do is they have something called facilitated business entry. It's also called temporary entry sometimes. So what this is once the visa requirements have been met, it facilitates for certain categories of professionals, business people, and investors their entry into other markets. So it makes it easier for you to enter to supply your service, to provide training around your service, to service and investment, for example. So it's another key opportunity, but just keep in mind that it's only for certain categories of professionals, business people, and investors. So there's a list. You need to check to see if you'd be on it.
Chelsea, can you please repeat what you mentioned about the facilitated business entry? Because your voice cut a bit there. Yeah.
Okay, I will repeat that.
Thank you.
Facilitated business entry, also called temporary entry. So for certain categories of professionals, business people, and investors, once you satisfy the visa requirements of the other country, if there are any, the agreements try and make it easier for you to enter into that market to supply your service, to service and investment, to sometimes provide training around the service that you're supplying or the good that you're selling. So it's important to check the agreement because it's only for certain categories of professionals and business people and investors, so not every guys on the list. So there is a list that you need to check to see if you would be covered. But the intent really is recognition that it's not just about sending something across the border. That sometimes you need somebody to go with it to show how it's used, to service something, and really it's just trying to make that as easy as possible. So if you have questions about that as well, this is something that we can also help you figure out. So moving on to investment. So similar to the other sectors, greater certainty, greater stability, and greater transparency because the rules are there, they're spelled out. The rules also are something called minimum standard of treatment. So again, they can treat you no worse than they treat their own investor. So right away, you know how you're going to be treated. Now, it's important to remember that there are some exceptions, so you do have to be careful with that. So the other thing that agreements do is that there's often protection for investment. So there's some very clear rules on expropriation and very clear rules on compensation. So going in that you do have certain protections under these agreements. As I mentioned earlier, there's also the facilitated business entry for investors. And of course, there are some exceptions. So these are likely a smaller list, but you do need to check them or ask us and we can assist you. Now, the last sector of the economy that I'd like to talk about is government procurement. So government procurement, as you know, governments buy things. Governments buy goods, they buy services, they enter into construction contracts. And you know that you as a BC company, you're able to bid on government procurement here in BC and the provinces here in Canada. So when a trade agreement covers government procurement, this means that they are now opening up these government procurement markets to the free trade agreement partner. So one example is the EU agreement. Canada and the EU negotiated government procurement coverage in the trade agreement. So this means that BC companies have access to the EU market at every level of government in the EU. So starting with the EU institutions down to individual EU countries' procurement. So you as a company can now bid on those contracts. So in total, the EU procurement market is worth approximately 3.3 trillion a year. So a lot of opportunity there for you to try and supply your goods and your services in the EU market. So as I said, there's improved market access, and now you can go to other countries and try and sell your goods and services to their government. Greater certainty, stability, and transparency. Again, the rules are spelled out. You know how you will be treated. Now, it's very important to keep two things in mind. This is coverage and this is thresholds. So on the first point, coverage. The countries that negotiate government procurement, they negotiate what they want to cover. So this could be what levels of government. So for example, in an agreement, Canada could agree to cover the federal government only, or federal government and the provincial government. So it's the same thing in the other country. They may decide to only do national governments, or they may decide to do provincial and local governments as well. You need to keep in mind what is covered. Sometimes they could decide to cover 10 ministries and departments instead of, say, all 15. So that's another thing. Not every department may be included. The other thing to keep in mind is something called threshold. So typically how these work is that under the agreement, they agree that a contract that is worth above a certain amount, say, for example, if that's worth over 200,000, or say 50,000, and then that contract is now eligible for you to bid on. So every agreement has coverage, has different thresholds. So it's important to check what these are to see if it's an opportunity that you as a company can bid on. And this is also something that we can assist.
Chelsea, this is Alpana.
Yes.
So can you just repeat what you mentioned about threshold? Because
Of course.
we missed a few words there.
Of
And
course.
also one of the participants has submitted a question about government procurement projects is, do we have any example of successful bidding for government procurement projects in EU?
Okay, sure. Well, why don't I start with the threshold part?
Sure, thank you.
Okay, so as I said, when you're looking for government procurement contracts and opportunities in other markets, you need to keep in mind the coverage and the threshold. So coverage, as I said, what level of government is covered, what departments are covered. So that's the first thing. Now for thresholds, the countries agree that in each agreement is slightly different. They agree that if a contract is worth of a certain amount, and that amount could be 25,000, it could be 50,000, 100,000, like they agree what the number is, then that contract becomes eligible for a foreign company to bid on. So, for example, if the threshold they agreed on is $50,000, then if you find a contract that's worth $55,000 or $52,000, you are eligible to bid on that contract as a foreign company. So every agreement has slightly different thresholds and has slightly different coverage. So, if you have questions about this, if you're having difficulty figuring out what they are, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have government procurement experts that can provide that advice. We can also connect you with others in the federal government who can also provide that advice. Was that okay, Alpana? Could you hear it?
Yeah, so the question was, any example of successful bidding for government procurement projects in EU?
I actually don't have an example on me right now, so I can look in to see if I can find something, and then I can send it to you, Alpana, to share with the group.
Absolutely.
We'll have to check on that. Let me just make a note, a quick note of that, and then I'll check on that.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to how you can figure out what the tariff rate is for the product that you are interested in selling. So what you will need to know, the harmonized system code for your product. So harmonized system codes, also called HS codes, these are the unique number identifiers for your product, for your component, for a piece of product that you're trying to export or import. So it's everything has a number. So for example, your phone have a unique HS code, but also the components within the phone have their own HS code as well. So one thing is, so it's really good to know what that number is. Now, this resource that I'd like to show you is called the Canada Tariff Finder. It's created by the federal government. If you don't have your HS code, if you look at the bottom box where it says describe the product, if you have a keyword for your product and you put it in, it can actually find what the HS code is likely to be for your product. It'll ask you a few questions to narrow it down. So I'm going to go through an example with you. So first of all, you need to identify if you're exporting or importing. And just note on importing. So a lot of people focus on exports for free trade agreements, but actually they offer a lot of opportunities for importers as well. So with a free trade agreement, you have additional countries where you can source inputs for your manufacturing and your processing and build it into your process here in BC. So because of the trade agreement, those may actually be parts where you currently may be sourcing. A lot of opportunities. We're going to do an example. So I'm going to put exporting, and then you select where you want to export it to. Now, this is only for countries that Canada has a free trade agreement with. So I'm going to put in Japan, and the product that I want to look up is Apple. And because I don't know the HS code, the harmonized system code for apples, I'm going to just describe the product as apples. So once you find, the next screen will ask you a series of questions to narrow down what the HS code is. So it's going to ask me what kind of apples and how they're preserved or prepared, because that will change the harmonized system code. So I'm going to select just fresh or chilled apple and click OK. So once I do that, you can see that it's narrowed down the HS code for me. So you start with 08 for edible fruits, and then you bring it down to apples, pears, and quinces, fresh. And then the bottom row, that is the specific code for fresh or frozen apples. and that is the code that I will use to look up tariffs to send them to other countries. So then you confirm your HS code. So you can do a similar process to figure out what the HS code is for your product or your input. So the next thing to do is to enter in that I want to send it to Japan and ask it to calculate the tariff rate. And this is one thing that it will show me. It will show me that right now, in 2019, the tariff for apples is just over 10%. So it will show me that under the trade agreement, this curve is going to come down to each stage. You can see the incline of the curve, how it's slowly making.
Chelsea, can you repeat this about whatever information you gave about this slide again? Because
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Okay. So for this chart, so once you figure out what the HS code is for your product, you select what country you want to send it to, and this is the first bit of information that it will show you. So it will show you what the tariff rate, so the duty rate is over the next several years. So you can see 2019 for apples from Canada going to Japan under the trade agreement, it is costing, I would say, probably about 12%. And you can see that this line, the incline, is going down, which means that the tariff is coming down year over year over year until it reaches 0% in 2029. So the green line is what Canada is paying. Now the gray box, that is what every other country that doesn't have a trade agreement with Japan is paying. So you can see already that we have a tariff advantage over every other country that doesn't have an agreement. So just to show this information in a different format, it also provides it in a table. So the first row where it says MFN, MFN means most favored nation. So most favored nation is what every country that does not have a trade agreement pays. So every other country is paying 17% right now. Canada, under the CPTPP, in 2019, we're paying 12.7%. And you can see that next year it'll drop to 11.4%, while everyone else is still paying 17%. 2021, it'll drop to 10.2%, everyone's still paying 17%. And you will see that it goes down in equal stages until 2029, where it will be. So you can use this really helpful tool to look up what the tariff will be for your product right now, what other countries are paying, and what the tariff will be over the next.
Chelsea, one of the participants has submitted just a question about the tariff finder. So if they want to, is there a specific URL they have to go to? Where is the information available?
Of course. So I will have a slide that shows the URL for that. But you can also just Google Canada Tariff Finder, and then it should pop up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, but I will also have the URL. Another comment I'd like to make is that actually other countries also have similar tariff finders. So you can use the Canadian site, and also if you're looking to export to the EU, for example, they have their own tariff finder that also provides information on internal taxes in the EU, regulations in the EU. So it gives you additional information to be useful to you if you're trying to export there. So you can start with the Canadian site, but just be aware there are several sites as well. All right, so moving on, I'd just like to cover some of the resources. So right off the bat, you'll see the URL for the Canada Tariff Finder. So that is the link for this tool that I've just showed you how to use. But as I said, if you just Google it, you'll be able to find it as well. Now, the other resource we have is called the BC Export Navigator Program. So they're located all around the province, and they can assist BC companies with navigating the process towards exporting. Other resources that are available to you, I put the information for the office I work for, the Trade Policy Negotiations branch. You'll see my director's name. You'll see my name next to it. There's another branch in the ministry that does trade readiness. You'll see the information for the executive director, John McDonald. And then below that, you'll see two links. The first link is for BC Trade and Investment Representatives. So BC has trade offices all around the world, and their job is to help BC companies do business with those countries. So this is a free resource that you as a BC company can access. Now, in addition to BC's trade offices, the federal government also has trade offices all around the world, and it's called Canada's Trade Commissioner Service. So you have the option of going to the provincial government or the federal government to get assistance. Now, just to show you where BC's trade offices are in the world, this map with the little white dots, it shows you where they are. So in China, BC has 4 trade offices. They're in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Hong Kong. In India, we have 3 offices in Delhi, Mumbai, and Chandigarh. In the US, 4 offices in Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and Boston. Southeast Asia, we're in Manila, Jakarta, Singapore. Japan, we're in Tokyo. South Korea and Seoul. In Europe, in London. So if you Google BC Trade and Investment Representatives or BC Trade Offices, you should be able to find the website that has this information. It has contact information for all the different offices. So you can submit a query through the website or send a note. So if you are going to those markets, if you have questions about those markets, there are people there hired by the BC government that are there to assist. Okay, great, and I'd like to take a pause now and see if there are any questions.
So I have received quite a few questions, Chelsea. I do want to apologize to our participants today because of the challenges that we had with the sound quality. But we are here. If you have any questions after the webinar regarding FTA, we are here to respond to that. So feel free to reach out to us. So I do have a few questions that was submitted, that has been submitted. So one of the participants says, I have a social media company and I have received an inquiry from a potential client in Germany. I understand that Canada has CETA with European Union. So how does that benefit my company and how do I claim those benefits?
Sure. Okay, so in terms of the social media company and you've received a client in Germany, so there is a free trade agreement with CETA, as you say. And if it is a product that is a digital product that's printed electronically, there should be no duties on that. If it's a product that if it's a physical product, the tariffs are likely reduced or likely zero. As I said earlier, 90% of tariffs of Canadian products are now zero under that agreement. So every company has a slightly different process for claiming those tariff benefits. Usually it is on the importer side and they have to submit a form to their equivalent of CVSA. So this is something that we can help you figure out. It's also something that we could recommend checking different government sites. I actually have a link to the EU government, so I will send that out after this call so you can start with that.
That's great, thank you. And also it's important to remember that you have to claim those tariff benefits that don't apply automatically.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah. Okay, so this another question is about food products. So this client exports energy food products to Brazil. So she has a question about, has Canada signed any FTA with Brazil? If yes, how does that help me save money and stay competitive in Brazil?
Okay, great question. So Canada does not yet have an agreement with Brazil, but Canada is actually negotiating an agreement with the Mercosur economic group in South America, of which Brazil is a member of. So these negotiations are currently ongoing. So if there's a product that you're trying to send to Brazil, if you're having any issues, or if you think this is a great opportunity for your company, I really encourage you to send an email to the federal government. If you want, you can send it to me and we will pass it on. This lets the negotiators know that, hey, there's a BC company that sees an opportunity in Brazil for this product. We want to send it over there. And then this helps them build it into the negotiation. So it becomes something that the government can try and negotiate the barriers down as part of the negotiation so that hopefully when the negotiations conclude and there's a free trade agreement, your product will benefit from that. So really encourage you, if you have an interest there, this goes for, pretty much any country where you have interest, let the government know. So then we can try and build it into the negotiation. Yeah, so send me an email or send the federal government an email. Either way works.
Okay, that's great. It's very important to, let the government know, right, that how it is important and help Canadian companies stay competitive. So there's another question, Chelsea, from a client who exports to US. She's already exporting to US. So she says, I understand that Canada, USA, Mexico have negotiated a new trade deal. Can I use NAFTA till the new treaty is confirmed or ratified by all these 3 countries?
Really good question. Thank you for that one. Yes, absolutely. Continue using the NAFTA. So the NAFTA remains in effect until the new agreement is ratified by all 3 countries and brought into effect. So that has not happened yet. The renegotiated agreement is not in effect yet. So you need to continue using the NAFTA agreement until that time. Great question.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. One of the clients participants who is planning to export, thinking about exporting, She has asked a question saying, if I have questions about a specific FTA, because right now she is in the market research stage. So she has questions about a specific FTA, who should I connect with?
Okay, so there's a couple things you can do. You can reach out to me or others in my office. We're happy to sort of walk you through what the opportunities are in the different agreements. One thing that I usually like to start with is if you Google the trade agreement that you're interested in, the federal government maintains a really good website with information on each trade agreement. And what they do is they often break it out by different sectors. So they'll have a page that talks about, say, the European Agreement for agri-food. They'll talk about the European Agreement for ICT, for energy, for textiles and that sort of thing. So the different agreements that the federal government has, different websites have information for different sectors. They also have information for different provinces as well. So there's a lot of really great information. I can send out some links after this call. And as I said, if you've done your research, if you still have questions, or if you just don't know where to start, shoot me an email, and and we can sort of brainstorm that together, and I can sort of point you in the right direction. And I can also connect you with others in the federal government if I am not the right person or if I don't know the answer to your question. I'll send out some links, but as I said, you can start with me or you can contact the federal government as well.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that. So, all right, we have almost come to the end of our session. All the participants will be receiving a follow-up email from us, and it will be greatly appreciated if you could give us some feedback so we can improve this session for future sessions. And I do acknowledge that we had these technical challenges today with the sound quality, so my apologies for that. We'll try to find out what was the technical reason behind it. I also want to encourage our participants to take a look at our upcoming webinars. There's one coming up on financial management on October 2nd, one on negotiate naturally on October 16, and a strategic alliances on October 23rd. You can sign up for these webinars online at on our website, womensenterprise.ca. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter also. So thank you to the participants. Thank you for being part of this webinar. And on behalf of Women's Enterprise Center, I would like to thank our amazing panelists, Chelsea, for sharing this important information on free trade agreement and demystifying FTAs. And I do apologize for our problem with our sound qualities today. Before I conclude, I just got one more question, Chelsea. This participant says, I want to sell shoes online, but it will be shipped from Korea directly to the client. I want to know if there is a way I can give a benefit to my client when they make clearance.
So for this question, one thing I will need to know is where the shoes are going, like from Korea to what country. So yeah, I would suggest for this one, if you could email me the question and give me a bit more details on
she says Korea to Canada.
Okay.
So yeah.
So it should fall under the Canada-Korea agreement, and typically it's the importer that has to fill out a form with, CVSA or whatever the equivalent is to get that tariff benefit.
Yeah. Okay, I hope that responds to the client question. So thank you so much. Thank you to the participants. Again, my apologies for the sound quality, and thank you so much, Chelsea, for sharing the information and demystifying.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah,
thank you.
Just one point, if anybody has any more questions, just email me at any time. It doesn't have to be today. It could be 6 months from now. Just send me an email.
Yeah, and we at Women's Enterprise Center are also very happy to respond to any questions that you have regarding free trade agreements. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.